The space station trembled, and Princess knew something was wrong. She had attended many diplomatic events in her life, but this was her first Galactic Concordance Summit. The massive structure floating in neutral space housed representatives from 40 different species, all gathered to discuss trade routes and territorial disputes. Her mother, Queen, had sent her to observe and learn. The Empire had ruled their section of the galaxy for 3,000 years, and one day would need to understand how to deal with other species. She walked through the crystalline corridors with her guards flanking her on both sides. They were known throughout the galaxy for their beauty and their minds. They could read thoughts, predict outcomes, and calculate probabilities faster than most computers. Logic guided every decision they made. Emotion was something they had evolved beyond, or so they believed. The humans were new to the Concordance. They had only been given observer status 5 years ago, after finally achieving faster-than-light travel. Most species saw them as primitive and dangerous. They had nearly destroyed their own planet with nuclear weapons just 200 years ago. They fought constant wars among themselves. They made decisions based on feelings rather than facts. The delegation had voted against allowing humans to even observe the summit, but they had been outvoted. Had seen a few humans around the station. They were shorter than stockier, with strange variations in skin and hair color. They wore simple uniforms and mostly worked in maintenance or security positions. None of them attended the actual summit meetings. The trembling grew stronger. Alarms began to sound throughout the station. His personal communicator lit up with an emergency message. A shipping vessel had malfunctioned during docking and crashed into the station's outer ring. Multiple hull breaches were reported. All personnel were ordered to evacuate to the inner core immediately. Her guards immediately started moving, pulling her along with them. They rushed through the corridors as other delegates and workers ran in panic. They moved with calculated efficiency, their minds already plotting the fastest route to safety. They turned a corner and entered a long hallway that connected to the main evacuation corridor. Halfway through, the station shuddered violently. The walls groaned, heard a terrible ripping sound like metal being torn apart. She looked up just in time to see a section of the ceiling buckle. Emergency doors began to close, sealing off the breached sections to prevent total decompression. Her guards saw the danger instantly. Their mental calculations told them they had 4 seconds to clear the doorway before it sealed. 2 guards could make it, 3 could not. The logical choice was clear. Both guards released and sprinted for the door. They cleared it with half a second to spare. The emergency door slammed shut and found herself trapped in a section that was rapidly losing atmosphere. She could already feel the air thinning. The breach was somewhere behind her, sucking the oxygen out into space. She had perhaps 90 seconds before she would lose consciousness. Her mind, trained in meditation and logic, calculated her survival probability. 0.3%, essentially zero. She accepted this with calm. Death was simply the end of existence. There was no point in fear or regret. Her guards had made the correct choice. Better 2 survive than all 3 die. She sat down on the floor and closed her eyes, preparing for the end. Then she heard running footsteps. Opened her eyes. A human was sprinting toward her, carrying a large metal toolkit. He was young, perhaps 30 in human years, wearing a maintenance technician's uniform. His red. He had dark hair and wore strange protective goggles on his forehead. "Are you hurt?" he shouted in heavily accented Galactic standard. "The door is sealed," said calmly. "We are both going to die. You should have kept running." The human named stared at her like she had said something insane. "Yeah, not doing that," he said. He dropped his toolkit and started pulling out tools. "How long do we have?" "Approximately 1 minute and 14 seconds before loss of consciousness," said. "There is no escape. The emergency doors require station command to override." "Good thing I'm not planning to use the door then," said. He ran to the wall and started examining a panel. His hands moved quickly, pulling off the cover plate. Behind it was a mess of wires and circuits. Watched in confusion. What was he doing? There was no logical solution to this situation. The breach was venting air. The door was sealed. Even if he could somehow call for help, rescue would take too long. "You cannot fix this," she said. Her voice was getting weaker. The air was definitely thinner now. "Watch me," muttered. He was connecting wires, bypassing circuits, doing something that made no sense to strained mind. She felt dizzy. Her vision started to blur. The human was going to die because he refused to abandon her. How wasteful, how illogical, how noble. The thought surprised her. Nobility was not logical. It was an emotion, a primitive concept. But watching this human work desperately to save her, knowing he would die in the attempt, something stirred in her chest, something she had never felt before. Pulled a canister from his toolkit and jammed it into the wall panel. He twisted something, hit something else with his fist, and suddenly heard a hissing sound. Air. He had somehow rerouted emergency oxygen from another section into their sealed corridor. "That'll buy us 3 minutes," said, breathing hard. "Now for the hard part." The hard part, that had been the easy part. Ran back to his toolkit and pulled out what looked like a small welding torch and a metal plate. He sprinted to the far end of the corridor, where the breach was pulling away their atmosphere. Watched in amazement as he literally welded a metal plate over the breach, his body anchored by a magnetic belt. The air stopped escaping. The pressure started to stabilize. But they were still sealed in. Came back covered in sweat. "Can you walk?" Nodded, still too shocked to speak. "Good, hold on to me." Before she could ask why, picked her up and threw her over his shoulder like she weighed nothing. Then he ran. Not toward the sealed door, but toward a maintenance hatch she had not even noticed. He opened it and climbed down a ladder into the station's maintenance tunnels, carrying her the entire way. 10 minutes later, they emerged in a safe section. Medical teams rushed to check on. Station security wanted to know what happened. Other delegates crowded around, relieved she was alive. Through it all, kept her eyes on the human technician named. He was giving a report to his supervisor, looking embarrassed by all the attention. He had risked his life for her. He had solved an impossible problem through sheer determination and creativity. He had refused to accept the logical conclusion that they would both die. And he had saved her life. A guard approached and said something could not hear, probably thanking him on behalf of the Empire, shrugged and said something back. Then he picked up his toolkit and walked away, just another maintenance worker returning to his duties. But could not stop thinking about him, the human who did not calculate, the human who simply refused to give up. 3 days later, after the summit had relocated to a safer station, found herself searching the maintenance rosters. She told herself she just wanted to properly thank him. That was the logical thing to do. But deep down she knew the truth. She wanted to understand him. This human named, who had shown her that maybe, just maybe, there were things in the universe more important than logic. Finding was easier than expected. Maintenance workers on the new summit station worked in shifts, and humans tended to stick together in the cafeteria during their breaks. She went there wearing a simple cloak instead of her royal garments. Without her guards and official robes, most people did not recognize her. Sat alone at a corner table, eating something brown and unidentifiable from a tray while reading from a data pad. Approached nervously. She had rehearsed what to say 100 times, calculating the perfect words to express gratitude. But when she reached his table, all her planning disappeared. "Hello," she said simply. Looked up and nearly dropped his fork. His eyes went wide. "Princess, I mean Your Highness, I should." He started to stand, looking confused about proper protocol. "Please sit," said quickly. "I just wanted to thank you properly for saving my life." "Oh, you're welcome," sat back down awkwardly. "I was just doing my job." "Your job is to die for foreign royalty?" asked. Laughed at that, a short, surprised sound. Fair point, I guess I couldn't leave you there. Why not? Asked. The question was genuine. She truly wanted to understand. The logical choice was to save yourself. Maybe, said with a shrug. But I wasn't really thinking about logic. I just knew someone needed help. Sat down across from him without asking permission. Looked even more nervous now. You are very different from what I expected humans to be, she said. Different how? The Concordance briefings describe humans as violent and unpredictable. You seem kind. Made a face. Yeah, we get that a lot. Humans can be violent, we have a pretty rough history, but we can also be other things. He paused. What are like? I mean besides being, telepathic and super logical. And just like that, they started talking. Asked about Earth, about human culture, about what it was like growing up on a planet instead of a space station. Asked about meditation techniques and what it felt like to predict probabilities. An hour passed, then two. Other workers came and went. Nobody bothered them. Learned that had grown up on Earth in a place called Korea. He had studied engineering and signed up for off-world work to see the galaxy. He loved old Earth movies and actually cooked his own food instead of eating recycled protein paste. He played something called a guitar and had a pet cat waiting for him back home named Lucky. Learned that had never actually chosen her own clothes, that every decision in her life had been calculated and planned, and that she had never tasted chocolate or heard music that was not mathematically optimized for mental efficiency. That's really sad, said without thinking. Then he looked horrified. Sorry, I didn't mean. No, said slowly. You are right, it is sad. I never realized it before. Before left did something unexpected. He took a wrapped candy from his pocket and offered it to her. Try this, it's chocolate, the real stuff from Earth, not synthetic. Took it carefully. Did not need to eat much, and they certainly did not eat for pleasure. But she unwrapped the candy and put it in her mouth. The taste exploded across her tongue, sweet and rich and complex. She made an undignified sound of surprise. Grinned, good, right. This is illogical, said. It serves no nutritional purpose. Nope, that's kind of the point. Visited the cafeteria the next day, and the day after that. Soon it became routine. She would find during his breaks and they would talk. She started bringing questions written down on her data pad. He started saving interesting foods to share with her. Showed her human movies on his personal viewer. Watched stories about people who fell in love, who fought for hopeless causes, who sacrificed everything for others. She cried during a film about a man who spent years in prison but never gave up hope. Seemed embarrassed that she was crying, but also pleased that she understood the story. Your art is full of pain, observed. Yeah, agreed. But also hope. That's kind of our thing. We suffer a lot, but we keep hoping things will get better. Introduced to meditation. She taught him how to quiet his mind and sense the probability fields that surrounded all events. He was not very good at it, but he tried hard. His determination reminded her of how he had refused to accept her death in that sealed corridor. 6 months passed like this. Secret meetings, shared meals, long conversations about everything and nothing. Felt something growing inside her that she had no name for. Her people had eliminated this feeling centuries ago. They chose mates based on genetic compatibility and probability of successful offspring. Love was an ancient concept, something primitive species clung to. But was falling in love, she knew it, and it terrified her. The court eventually discovered her secret friendship. One of her guards reported seeing her in the cafeteria. The news reached Queen within hours. Mother contacted her immediately, her mental voice cold and sharp across the telepathic link. You will cease contact with this human immediately. Mother, he saved my life. And we are grateful, but continuing association is inappropriate. Humans are short-lived, violent, and illogical. You are a crown princess. This ends now. Obeyed. For 3 days, she did not visit the cafeteria. She attended diplomatic functions and studied probability mathematics and acted like a proper princess. She was miserable. On the fourth day, found her. He was not supposed to be in the diplomatic quarters, but he had somehow talked his way past security. He looked determined and nervous at the same time. "Your guards told me you can't see me anymore," he said without preamble. "That is correct," said stiffly. "It was inappropriate for us to fraternize. I apologize for any confusion." Confusion, looked hurt. "Is that what this was to you?" It was, struggled to find words. It was a cultural exchange, nothing more. "You're lying," stepped closer. "I can't read minds like you can, but I know when someone is lying. These past 6 months meant something, to both of us." "Even if that were true," said quietly, "it changes nothing. You are human. I am, my mother has forbidden." "I don't care what your mother says," interrupted. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a ring. He had made it himself from a piece of polished metal, simple but beautiful. "I know this is crazy. I know we're from different worlds, literally. I know humans and don't do this, but I love you, and I think you love me too." "Love is illogical," whispered, but her eyes were locked on the ring. "Yeah," agreed. "It really is, so what?" Thought about chocolate that served no purpose, about movies full of pain and hope, about a man who refused to abandon her in a sealed corridor because it was the right thing to do, not the logical thing. "Yes," she said. "Yes. Yes, I will marry you." Looked stunned, like he had not actually expected her to say yes. Then he smiled so wide it looked like his face might split. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Kissed him, her first kiss ever. It was illogical and wonderful and terrifying. And somewhere deep in the diplomatic wing, alarms started going off as the delegation's monitoring systems detected what had just happened. The galaxy was about to learn that sometimes the most logical choice is to throw logic away. The news spread across the galaxy faster than any ship could travel. Crown Princess of the Empire was going to marry a human maintenance technician. No genetic compatibility tests, no astrological calculations, no psychic bonding ceremony. Just a simple human wedding based on something as primitive and illogical as love. The court demanded return home immediately. Queen sent 3 warships to the summit station with orders to retrieve her daughter by force if necessary, but refused to board. She stood in the docking bay with beside her and told the captain that she was no longer subject to law. She had made her choice. Earth's government was equally unhappy. Humanity had worked for decades to earn their place in the concordance. Now one technician was threatening everything by insulting the second most powerful empire in the galaxy. The Earth ambassador called directly and ordered him to end the engagement immediately. Listened to the entire speech. Then he said, "No, sir, with respect, no. You will destroy humanity's future in the concordance," the ambassador shouted. "Maybe," agreed. "Or maybe I'll show them that humans value love more than politics. Either way, I'm marrying her." He ended the call. The other concordant species watched with fascination and horror. Some thought it was the most romantic thing they had ever witnessed. Others thought it proved humans were dangerously unstable and should be removed from the concordance entirely. Everyone had an opinion. And became fugitives. Earth would not protect them. The Empire wanted back. They could not return to any major station or planet without being arrested. So they went to the outer colonies, the independent worlds that did not answer to any empire. They found themselves on New Haven, a human colony world that had declared independence from Earth 30 years ago. The colonists there were farmers, miners, and people who wanted to live free from government control. When N arrived and explained their situation, the colony's council met for less than an hour before making their decision. "You can marry here," the council leader said. She was an old woman named with weathered skin and kind eyes. "We don't care what Earth or the think. Love is love." The wedding was nothing like a bonding ceremony. There were no priests calculating compatibility percentages, no officials verifying genetic diversity, no computer systems optimizing the match. Instead, there was a small crowd of colonists, some flowers from New Haven's gardens, and standing before them reading from an old paper book. Wore a simple white dress that one of the colonists had made, wore his cleanest uniform. They stood in a field under an open sky, something had never experienced on space stations. The sun felt warm on her face. "Do you take this woman to be your wife?" asked. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," said. His voice was steady and sure. "Do you take this man to be your husband? To have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Felt tears running down her face. Did not cry, but she was not being a right now, she was being herself. "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by absolutely nobody important," said with a smile, "I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss." They did, and the small crowd cheered. Someone had set up cameras. The wedding was broadcast across the galactic network before anyone could stop it. Billions watched a princess and a human technician kiss in a field of flowers, surrounded by cheering colonists. It was scandalous. It was beautiful. It was everything the Concordance had tried to calculate out of existence. And something unexpected started happening. On an industrial station, an engineer named Minu watched the broadcast with his assigned mate beside him. They had been matched by computer 3 years ago based on genetic compatibility and work efficiency. They barely talked to each other. After the broadcast ended, Minu looked at his mate and asked, "Are you happy?" She stared at him in surprise. Happiness was not a factor in mating. I do not know," she admitted. "Are you?" "No," Minu said quietly, "I am not." It was the first honest conversation they had ever had. On a cruiser, a pilot named received her new mate assignment. She looked at the file and saw a stranger she would be bonded to in 2 weeks. She thought about Princess, who had given up everything to marry someone she chose, filed a formal refusal for the first time in history. Her superiors did not know how to respond. There was no protocol for refusal. Stories like this. Across dozens of species, individuals began questioning systems that had been in place for centuries. Or, why were mates assigned by computers? Why was emotion considered weakness? Why had they calculated love out of their lives? The Concordance held an emergency session. The debate lasted for 3 days. Should Princess be forcibly returned to the Empire? Should humanity be expelled from the Concordance for corrupting other species? Should marriage based on emotion be banned entirely? Queen attended the session personally. She stood before the assembled representatives and made her position clear. Princess has broken our most sacred laws. She has chosen emotion over logic, primitive tradition over advanced calculation. She has brought shame to the Empire. The Queen paused. Every species waited for her to demand punishment. And I do not know if she is wrong. Shocked silence filled the chamber. "We pride ourselves on logic," Queen continued. "We calculate everything. We have no wars, no crime, no inefficiency. But we also have no passion, no art, no joy. We exist efficiently, but do we truly live?" She looked directly at the camera that was broadcasting across the galaxy. "My daughter smiled more in that human wedding than in all her years at the court. Perhaps the humans have discovered something we calculated ourselves out of." The speech caused chaos in the Concordance. It was unprecedented for a major power to admit potential inferiority to humans, of all species. But Queen was not finished. She made an announcement that shocked everyone further. "The Empire will not pursue Princess. She has made her choice, and I will respect it. However, I have one request for my daughter and her husband." The message was transmitted to New Haven, and watched it together in their small borrowed house. They had been married for exactly 6 days. They held hands as Queen's image appeared. The Queen said. Her face was carefully controlled but could see something in her mother's eyes she had never seen before: uncertainty. I do not understand what you have done, but I am trying to return to space, not as my prisoner but as my teacher. Help me understand this thing humans call love. Help me understand what we have lost. Squeezed hand. It's your choice, he said quietly. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. Thought about the lonely corridors of the court. She thought about her mother, who had ruled with perfect logic for 200 years and was now admitting she might have been wrong. She thought about all the other species who were beginning to question their own calculated lives. We should go, said. Not just for my mother, for everyone who is starting to wonder if there is more to life than logic. So they prepared to return, not as fugitives or prisoners, but as ambassadors of a very different idea. The idea that some things could not be calculated or predicted. The idea that sometimes the heart knew better than the mind. The idea that love was not a weakness, but perhaps the greatest strength of all. The attack came 3 weeks after and returned to space. They were staying in the royal palace while tried to help her mother understand human concepts of love and choice. It was difficult work. Had optimized emotion out of their culture for so long that explaining feelings was like teaching color to someone who had only seen in black and white. Found it strange living in a palace. Everything was beautiful and perfectly organized, but it felt cold. There were no personal items anywhere, no pictures or decorations chosen just because someone liked them. Every object served an optimal purpose. He missed the messy warmth of human spaces. They were having breakfast when the alarm sounded. Not station malfunction alarms like before. These were military alerts, harsh and urgent. Queen's face appeared on every screen in the palace simultaneously. All citizens evacuate to shelters. This is not a drill. They have returned. Looked at. Who are the? His face had gone pale. Our ancient enemy. They nearly destroyed us 800 years ago. We drove them back, but millions died. They are part biological, part machine. They do not negotiate. They only conquer. Military officers rushed into the room. Your Majesty, Princess, you must evacuate to the underground command center immediately. Followed as they were hurried through the palace. The command center was deep beneath the surface, protected by layers of shielding and armor. Dozens of officers worked at stations, tracking the invasion force. What saw on the displays made his blood run cold. The fleet was massive. Hundreds of ships, each one bristling with weapons. They were not just attacking one border station. They were invading across the entire frontier simultaneously. Queen stood at the center of the command center, receiving reports. Her face showed no emotion, but had learned enough about to recognize the slight tension in her shoulders. She was afraid. Military assessment, the Queen ordered. A general stepped forward. His voice was flat and precise. The force outnumbers us 3-1. They have superior weapons technology and reinforced armor. Our defensive positions are optimal, but the probability calculations are clear. We have a 12% chance of repelling the invasion. A 5% chance of survival if we commit to full military engagement. The logical recommendation is to open negotiations for conditional surrender. Silence filled the command center. Surrender, whispered. It preserves genetics and culture, the general explained. Under rule, our people will continue to exist. Total war means extinction. The choice is logical. Queen closed her eyes. Every calculation, every probability field she could sense told her the same thing. They could not win. The logical choice was surrender, preserve what they could. But then she opened her eyes and looked at the human who had refused to accept that would die. The human who had married her daughter not because it was logical, but because it was right. Bring the human here, Queen said. Guards escorted forward. He felt very small and very human, surrounded by tall, elegant, Queen studied him for a long moment. "You saved my daughter when the logical choice was to save yourself," she said. "You married her when the logical choice was to walk away. Humans do not calculate probabilities like we do. So I ask you, human, what do you see when you look at these numbers? What do humans do when facing extinction?" Looked at the displays. The numbers were bad, really bad. Any military commander on Earth would probably recommend evacuation or surrender. But something about the way Queen asked the question made him think she did not want Earth military doctrine. She wanted something else. "We don't calculate," said slowly. "We don't look at percentages and decide it's hopeless. We look at what we have and figure out how to make it work. We improvise, we adapt, we fight anyway." "Even when victory is mathematically impossible?" the Queen asked. "Especially then," said. "Humans have a saying. It's not the size of the dog in the fight, but the size of the fight in the dog. You're looking at this all wrong. You're asking what's the probability of victory. You should be asking what will make the enemy give up first." The command center was silent. Every was staring at like he had suggested they could fly by flapping their arms. Queen made a decision that went against every instinct her people had developed over. "Human, I offer you temporary commission as military advisor to the Empire. Help us fight this enemy. In exchange, Earth will receive full Concordance membership and complete technology sharing rights." Mother No stepped forward. "He is a maintenance technician, not a soldier." "He is human," Queen said, "and right now that may be exactly what we need." She looked at, "Do you accept?" Thought about the numbers. 12% chance of victory, 5% chance of survival. Any sane person would run. But he thought about the people who were learning to feel again, about the other species watching to see if logic or love would triumph. "I accept," said, "but I have conditions. Full command authority over defensive operations, no interference from your generals, and Earth sends military support. You want human thinking, you are going to get a full dose of it." Queen smiled. It was a small smile, barely there, but it was genuine. Agreed. Within hours, messages were sent to Earth. The situation was explained. Humanity had a chance to prove their worth to the entire galaxy. Earth's government mobilized immediately. Ships were dispatched. Marines were loaded into transports. And they brought with them every trick, every dirty tactic, every bit of unpredictable chaos that humans had perfected through centuries of warfare. Stood in the command center studying the fleet positions. The generals watched him nervously. What was this human planning? "Tell me about those," said. "How do they think? How do they make decisions?" "They are like us in some ways," a general explained. "They calculate optimal strategies. They fight with perfect coordination. They do not make mistakes." "Perfect coordination," repeated. "That's their weakness." "How is perfection a weakness?" Grinned. It was not a nice grin. "Because they can't adapt to chaos. They calculate optimal responses. But what if we do things that make no sense? What if we fight in ways that have no logical pattern?" "That is impossible to plan." "Exactly," said. "So we won't plan, we'll improvise." He pulled up a map of the defensive positions. "Here's what we're going to do. First, we're going to fake a retreat, make them think we're surrendering. Then we're going to hit them from directions they think are impossible. Then we're going to make them angry." "Make them angry?" a general asked in confusion. "Angry enemies make mistakes," explained. "And we're going to make a lot of mistakes too, on purpose. We're going to look weak and disorganized. We're going to make them think they're winning. And when they get confident, when they think they have us figured out, that's when we strike for real." The generals looked at each other. This was insane. This violated every principle of logical warfare. Queen stepped forward. "Do it." And so began the strangest military operation in history. Gave orders that made no sense. He told ships to retreat when they should advance. He positioned defenses in ways that seemed random. He had some units broadcast false surrender signals while others played loud human music on all frequencies. The fleet moved forward confidently. Their calculations told them victory was certain. They were behaving irrationally, which only proved they were desperate and doomed. Then Earth ships arrived. They were not impressive ships. They were smaller than vessels, with weaker weapons and thinner armor, but they flew like demons. They broke every rule of space combat. They used suicide runs and fake outs and tricks that no logical species would ever consider. And they made the confused. For the first time in 800 years, they did not know what to do. How do you fight an enemy who fights without logic? How do you predict an enemy who has no pattern? Watched the enemy fleet start to hesitate and knew they had a chance. Just a chance, but sometimes that was enough. Now, he said quietly, we show them what humans learned a long time ago. Sometimes the crazy plan is the only plan that works. The Battle of Prime lasted for 3 days. It was the strangest battle the galaxy had ever witnessed. The fleet, which had conquered dozens of worlds through perfect calculation and coordination, found itself fighting an enemy that refused to follow any logical pattern. Coordinated the defense from the command center, but he did not give detailed orders. Instead, he told each ship captain the same thing. Make your own decisions. Be unpredictable. If you think of something crazy that might work, try it. For though this was terrifying, they had spent 3,000 years following precise calculations and optimal strategies. Now a human was telling them to guess, to improvise, to act on instinct instead of logic. But they tried. A cruiser commander named found himself facing 3 destroyers. His calculations said he could not win. The logical choice was to retreat. Instead, he remembered what it said. He powered down all his systems, making his ship look dead. They moved closer to confirm the kill, waited until they were right on top of him, then powered up and fired everything at point-blank range. 2 ships were destroyed before they could react. It worked because it was stupid, because no logical species would pretend to be helpless just to get a better shot. The human ships fought like nothing they had encountered. A destroyer called the was crippled early in the battle, engines destroyed, weapons systems failing. The captain calculated that his ship was finished, but then he remembered he was human. He aimed his dying ship at a command carrier and pushed the last of his engines to maximum. The ship crashed into the carrier at full speed, destroying both vessels. The crew knew they were dead anyway. They chose how to die. They chose to take the enemy with them. News of the sacrifice spread through both fleets. They were horrified and inspired. A crew had chosen death to help others. It was the most illogical thing imaginable. It was the most human thing imaginable, and it changed something in the soldiers. They started fighting not because calculations said they should, but because people they cared about were worth fighting for. Princess stood in the command center watching the battle displays. Her mother had ordered her to stay underground where it was safe, but had spent months learning about human stubbornness. She refused. I can help, she told. Have psychic abilities you are not using. Your military said psychic attacks don't work on the, replied, his eyes never leaving the tactical display. They have mental shielding. Not attacks, said, coordination. We can link minds across distances. Your human ships are fighting individually. What if we could connect them? Let them share information instantly. Looked at her, can you do that? I do not know. We never tried. It would require pushing our abilities beyond safe limits. The risk of mental damage is high. But it might work. Smiled. Sometimes the crazy plan is the only plan that works. You taught me that. She gathered every with psychic abilities who was willing to help. There were dozens of them. They formed a mental network and reached out to the human and ships fighting in space. They did not try to control the ships. They just connected them, letting information flow between minds faster than any computer network. Suddenly, every human captain knew where every other ship was. They could sense enemy positions through the network. They could coordinate without speaking. They became a swarm instead of individuals, moving together but still thinking independently. They had never faced anything like it. Their calculations broke down completely. How could they predict an enemy that combined human unpredictability with psychic coordination? How could they fight chaos that was somehow organized? The fleet began to retreat. For the first time in their history, they fled from a battle. But the cost was high. Collapsed, blood streaming from her nose. Other dropped unconscious. They had pushed their abilities too far. Medical teams rushed to help them. Caught before she fell, "I've got you," he whispered. "I've got you." "Did we win?" she asked weakly. "Yeah," said, tears in his eyes. "We won." The fleet disappeared into hyperspace. They would return eventually, but not soon. They needed time to calculate how to fight an enemy that did not follow the rules. The galaxy watched in amazement. The mighty horde who had destroyed civilizations had been driven off by a combined force of fighting with human tactics and humans coordinating with psychic powers. Two species that should have been incompatible had created something new together, something stronger than either could be alone. 1 year later, the Concordance held another summit. This time, it was at Prime, now rebuilt and stronger than before. Representatives from every species gathered in the Grand Assembly Hall. Queen stood at the central podium. She looked older now, but also warmer. Something in her had changed during the war. She had learned to value things beyond calculations. "For 3,000 years," Queen said, her voice carrying through the hall, "the Empire has relied on logic above all else. We calculated our way to supremacy. We removed emotion from our culture because we believed it made us weak. We were wrong." She gestured to where and sat together in the audience. "My daughter married a human. At the time, I thought it was the greatest mistake she could make. I thought emotion was inferior to logic. But when our empire faced extinction, it was not logic that saved us. It was a human technician who refused to calculate defeat. It was soldiers who chose to sacrifice themselves for others. It was my daughter who pushed her abilities beyond safe limits because love made her brave." Queen paused. "Humans have a saying, 'It is not the size of the dog in the fight, but the size of the fight in the dog.' For too long, we measured strength by technology and logic. We forgot to measure heart. We forgot to measure the willingness to fight for things that cannot be calculated." She looked directly at the assembled representatives. "Today, I formally propose that humanity be granted full membership in the Concordance, not as observers, not as probationary members, as full equals who have earned their place not through superior technology, but through superior spirit." The vote was unanimous. Every species agreed. Humanity had proven their worth. After the session ended, a young diplomat approached and she looked nervous but determined. "Princess, I have a question. It may seem foolish." "Ask," said kindly. "Your mother asked you who he was," the diplomat said, pointing at. "You told her he was the human you married, but I want to understand. What does that mean? What is marriage when it is not calculated?" And looked at each other. They had been asked this question many times over the past year. Species across the galaxy were suddenly interested in choosing their own mates, in this strange concept of love that humans practiced. "Marriage," said slowly, "is choosing someone and promising to keep choosing them even when it is hard, especially when it is hard." "But how do you know you chose correctly?" the diplomat asked. "Without calculations, without compatibility tests, how can you be certain?" "You cannot," admitted. "That is the point. Love requires faith. It requires trust. It requires accepting that some things are more important than certainty." The diplomat thought about this. Then she smiled, a gesture her species rarely used. "Thank you. I think I understand now." She walked away to find her assigned mate, ready to have a conversation about whether they wanted to stay together because calculations said they should, or because they chose to. Similar conversations were happening across the galaxy. The seed that An had planted was growing. Slowly, carefully, species were learning to value emotion alongside logic. They were learning that efficiency was not the same as happiness, that optimal was not the same as good. And walked through the gardens of Prime. The gardens had changed. Where once every plan had been arranged for perfect aesthetic calculation, now there were messy human flowers planted just because people liked them. Children played in areas that served no optimal purpose except joy. "Do you regret it?" asked, "giving up your old life for this?" Took his hand. She could still remember the princess she had been, cold and logical and lonely. She thought about the woman she had become, warm and emotional and loved. "Every choice has a cost," she said, "but some choices are worth any price." They kissed under the alien sun. Around them, the galaxy was changing, one choice at a time. And it all started because a human refused to leave a princess behind in a sealed corridor. Because sometimes the crazy plan is the only plan that works. Because sometimes love is stronger than logic. And because sometimes the most important question is not, what is the probability of success? But simply, what is the right thing to do?